recording this presentation. Oh, there we go. Okay. It took a hot second there for me to get the okay that the recording was going. So it is now recording and we are ready to go. All right. So thank you so much for joining Sierra and myself today for this month's nutritional download. Today we're going to be talking all about protein. What foods is it in? How much should I be eating? And other things to look for when it comes to protein. And the main reason why we thought that protein would be a great subject to talk about today is simply because it's become a hot topic recently. A lot of high protein fad diets are kind of out in the market now. I've gotten quite a few questions from different students regarding how much protein should I have? When should I be eating it? What sort of ways can I get plant-based protein? And so we'll be talking about all of those today. Like I said, my name is Kallen. I'm the dietitian on campus here with ISU Dining. I work with students who have meal plans here on campus regarding any questions they might have regarding food allergies, navigating the dining halls, if they're struggling or need some assistance with managing a diagnosed condition on campus, as well as any other food or nutrition questions that you might have. You can find me on Instagram at ISU Dining RD, where I post my lunch almost every single day and other great tips to balanced eating and developing a healthy relationship with food and how to use your dining centers here on campus to the best of your ability to maximize your meal plan. Okay, so today, kind of like what I said, we'll be talking about protein basics, as well as what foods protein is found in, different supplements, because that's also something that's usually hear of and have questions about, as well as different myths. And that's something that Sierra mentioned before, simply because there is a lot of talk about protein, but we never really learn the background of it. So we'll be talking about all of that today. First off, I like to start off every presentation with just a few of philosophies, simply because that's the take that I have with every presentation, as well as with every student who I work with here on campus. So number one is all foods fit, 100%. All foods fit in a balanced diet. It's all about figuring out what works best for you, how much, and eating intuitively with that. I also believe that health is cumulative, and so some of the behaviors that you are working on right now in college typically become the habits that you have when you graduate and when you become in the professional world as well. And so learning some of these things now when you're in college can definitely be a boost up to developing healthy habits later on. I also firmly believe that food is meant to taste good and therefore it's meant to be enjoyed. And circling back to number one, all foods fit. And so we should be enjoying all of these foods that we are able to have. Okay, getting right off the bat. So protein basics. We hear of protein, we know protein of maybe as a food group. We know that there are certain foods that are higher in protein, but what actually is it? So protein is what we call an essential macronutrient. So there are macronutrients and micronutrients. Micronutrients is easy to think of because that's the vitamins and minerals and things like that in the food that we eat. The macronutrients are the ones that are a little bit more of a broader umbrella, but protein is one of them, carbohydrates is another, and fat is the other. But protein is essential. Our body can't make its own, and so that's what makes it so important to have in our diets. Protein, one of the basic things that it does for our body is it helps to build body tissue, as well as it is a great fuel source for our body to use for all the things that it's doing every single day. Protein also does have the same energy density as carbohydrates, so that's a good thing to know. And the chemistry of protein, that biochemistry of it, we hear of amino acids, but what protein is amino acids are joined together by a peptide bond. Our body then, when we eat protein, uses those amino acids to build up and to repair those same body tissues that we mentioned earlier. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on today. For protein basics, it has an AMDR. That means the average macronutrient distribution range of 10 to 35% for the day. And so what that pretty much means is for protein specifically, about 10 to 30% of the food that we eat every day should be protein type foods. And we'll talk about that in another second. So when we're thinking of that like AMDR from 10 to 35%, that equals out to be about a fifth to about a third of our plate. And so when we're thinking of the My Plate method, it translates that to that perfectly. So with protein, it's about a fifth of our, because it's 1/5 of the food groups that we have. Some people prefer to include dairy underneath the protein food group, and therefore it would be 1/3 of the plate with that. And so it's very transferable, and that's how come the My Plate method became a little bit more common, seen simply because we put food on our plates. One thing that I also like to point out before we getting into a presentation like this is we're talking about food. Protein is a food group, but protein is a nutrient. And when we're thinking of these things, because protein is a macronutrient, is a nutrient in food, we need to translate that to the food that we eat, because that's what we eat, right? We eat food. We don't eat nutrients. We don't eat. Kind of horrible if we only just eat that. We have these nutrients that are in our food, and so we need to translate it into actual things that we are eating during our day. Okay, so when we're thinking about proteins, okay, so we kind of talked a little bit about the basics of protein, but what does protein actually do beyond just that build our body tissue? It helps to repair it as well. So collagen is one great example of this. Collagen is built by protein. It's a type of body tissue, and that's what actually gives our skin elasticity. And it also is very important in all of our connective tissue. So those connective tissues, that's our muscles, that's our ligaments, our tendons, our cartilage, all of those. So often we think of protein and amino acids for like muscle building, but really it's about all of that extra structure that's in our body. When we're thinking about protein, that's also essential for all of our essential and vital organs that we have, right? Our heart's still a muscle. Our lungs are still muscles. And so all of those also need protein just to make sure that they are up and running and doing everything that they are supposed to do to keep us living every single day. Protein is also really important in the production of a lot of other bodily things that we have and that we need, such as enzymes, those especially digestive enzymes. Protein is essential with the production of that. Protein also helps our body to maintain good pH balance as well as hydration balance, making sure we don't get too dehydrated during our day. Protein helps with the production of hormones. It helps to make sure that certain genes are expressed or not expressed. They also help with developing and helping our body keep our antibodies up, really important in our immune system. Protein also helps with the production of our body as well. So protein's really important for more things than what we just think of with building muscle. It's really helping to build that structure, that foundation for our entire body. Okay, so we kind of learned a little bit about the basics of protein, but what foods are they in? And how can I find them in the dining centers? How can I translate this to what I'm actually eating? So protein is kind of divided up into two different categories. Number one would be animal-based sources. So animal-based sources of proteins, you can see some great examples on the screen here, but these are what's called complete proteins. And the reason for that is because animal-based sources of proteins, almost all of them or all of them do contain all 9 essential amino acids. Again, our body cannot create protein. It can't build protein most of the times itself. And so we need to consume these 9 essential amino acids so that our body has that foundation and can use those amino acids to build all of the muscle and connective tissue that we have in our body. So some sources like this are eggs, any kind of meat, whether it's beef, pork, anything like that. Fish and shellfish are really common. Poultry products as well as dairy products as well. Dairy meaning any milk, cheese, yogurt, anything that is made from that milk there. The other half of protein sources would be plant-based sources. So in the top left corner there, you see a picture of a lot of different things, and that's a beautiful picture of a widespread of lentils, beans, and seeds. Those are very, very high protein sources, as well as quinoa in the second picture there on the top. Quinoa actually is very special simply because it is one of the few plant-based sources that are complete proteins, all of those 9 essential amino acids. The majority of other plant-based sources of protein are incomplete. That means that they don't have all 9 amino acids, and that's where you might have heard that you want to complement your plant protein sources. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit, so we'll just pause on that, but just know that quinoa is one of the few plant-based sources that is a complete protein source. Oats are also really good. Different soy products like tempeh, tofu, edamame, anything like that. Same thing with a different array of nuts, seeds, and nuts and seed butters as well. So all of those are really, really great plant-based sources of protein. Okay, so when you're in the dining centers, how can I find these things? First off, as you're starting to become aware of adding protein into your diet and into your plate, a great place to start is by checking the ISU Dining website. Checking the website and the menus first can usually give you a better idea of what to expect when you get into the dining centers, especially if you're in a time crunch, trying to eat before study group or off to a class or anything like that. Usually checking the website ahead of time, or even when you're walking from whatever building you're in to the dining center, can just give you a better idea of time. Having a plan, kind of. That basically just means going into the dining center, having checked the website, but being and allowing some flexibility there to change it up if something catches your eye instead. That's totally okay. Note that in the dining centers, we do make almost everything homemade. And so we've gotten questions from different students in the past asking how come we don't have a lot or we don't have maybe the Impossible Burger every single day or regularly, or how come we switch different plant-based burgers or products out and having a wide variety there. And it's simply because we like to make things homemade. That's how come like the burger at Clyde's is a falafel burger. We make that falafel mix homemade right here every single day for you. Same thing with any of our black bean burgers. Those are always made homemade that same day. We just think that homemade recipes taste better, it's fresher, and that way we're able to give the best product to our students. Note that there are protein options at almost every single venue in every single dining center. So you'll never be able to or never have to really seek things out that much. Friday Windows Conversations dining centers do focus a little bit more on plant-based options. So if you are a plant-based eater, vegan or vegetarian, Friday Windows and Conversations might be some of your go-tos, simply because they might have a little bit more options there. There are still lots of plant-based options in the other dining centers as well. You'll just probably have to mix and match between different venues. And sometimes that's even more fun anyways, because you get more variety of foods and different flavors in there in your meal as well. Okay, so I mentioned food complementation before. So what does that mean? It basically just means that two foods are supposed to complement each other and come together. Pairing plant proteins together can make it so that it becomes from an incomplete protein to a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids for you for your body. Examples of this would be hummus and crackers, some peanut butter on toast, tofu or beans with rice, as well as soup that has grains or legumes in it as well. Those are great ways just to blend two different kinds of plant-based foods together to make a whole protein item that has all 9 essential amino acids. Okay, so when we're talking about food that has protein in it, oftentimes afterwards I get questions regarding protein supplements. Do I need them? Are they needed? What do they do? Am I able to get the protein through my food, or should I have a supplement to really boost that up? So the long answer to that question is supplements aren't necessarily needed. It depends so much on the individual. Again, taking it back to the protein basics that we talked about earlier, about 10 to 35% of the food that we eat during our day should be higher in protein. But just know that that's usually pretty easy to get for the average individual. Also, our body only absorbs about 20 grams of protein at a time. So you might go to a steakhouse and see someone having a huge, giant, like 24-ounce steak. That's great if that's what you want to eat and that's what's going to satisfy you. But just know that only about 20 grams of that's going to be actually absorbed into your body. So when eating in the dining centers or eating out or any time during your life, you can still definitely eat that amount of food. Just follow your hunger and fullness cues and then eat what satisfies you. So because of knowing this AMDR, and that's usually pretty easy for the average individual to meet their protein needs at a time. Mostly supplements aren't needed, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit with one of the myths and talking through that as well. Okay, so like I mentioned, if this is what's going to satisfy you, still eat it. And so this is a great diagram of kind of what I mean by that, with using your internal hunger and fullness cues through intuitive eating. So are you eating enough? That's in general, not just protein foods. So recognizing, engaging yourself, how your body physically full. Are you feeling full there? Do you have a little bit of protrusion for your stomach? Are you having that fullness experience or no? If you're not, keep eating. That's totally okay. If you are, cool, awesome. Do you feel satisfied? Yes or no? If you say no to that, if you're not feeling satisfied, maybe you ate enough, but it's not actually what you wanted. Re-gauge that, eat what you want so that you can have that satisfaction factor. If you did feel satisfied, awesome, great. You're done with your meal and you can move on with what you have next. Okay, so in thinking about protein supplements, there are 3 main kinds of them. The first 2 are from dairy protein. So whey protein is usually what you commonly might think of or might see in some sort of a protein or any kind of a supplement store. It's very, very common. It is a dairy protein, so be aware of that if someone is vegan or has any restrictions to dairy or dairy products. Whey protein is digested and absorbed very, very quickly. Casein is one of the other proteins that are in dairy products. It is actually digested and absorbed very slowly, and so over a longer period of time. Therefore, it's more commonly used a little bit after a workout or when someone wants that side of those. We have a wide variety of different plant-based protein supplements. Usually soy protein or pea protein are the most common for those. Remember that because they are plant-based, they are an incomplete protein source and therefore contain a little bit of a smaller amount of protein per serving compared to whey and casein protein. Okay, so we've learned a lot about protein, the basics, what foods they're in, supplements. So there are a lot of questions, and these are honestly some of the biggest questions that I get from students, and that's how come we decided to add them in here. The more protein, the better, right? Again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, this actually is, but you can definitely eat more. Exactly like that example from the 24-ounce steak at the steakhouse. You can definitely eat that whole thing, but remember, only about 20 grams of it will probably be absorbed. And again, that's okay. Your body can't really store the protein, so it comes back to you're feeling satisfied, and if that's when thinking about portion sizes, the average portion size for any kind of like protein is about the same size as like the palm of your hand or a deck of cards, depending on the size and shape of your hand. My hand is a little bit smaller, so it might be a little bit bigger than this, but that averages out to be about 3 ounces. 3 ounces of any kind of animal protein is usually about 20 to 25 grams per serving, per 3 ounce serving. So that is exactly meets that criteria for about that 20 grams that's absorbed per time, per meal. The average daily amount that a human needs. Also, when thinking on those plant-based sources, again, 3 ounces, about the same size as the palm of your hand or a deck of cards of tempeh, tofu, another soy product, that's already close to 15 grams of protein per 3 ounces. So really, it's pretty easy for the average adult to get all of the protein that they could possibly need from food, therefore not really needing supplementation for it. But I'm a gym goer, so I definitely need a supplement, right? Again, not necessarily. Think about the foods that you eat during your day. Also, remember that your body absorbs protein from food a little bit easier than supplements. About sources of protein, as well as about how much their needs are and how much protein is in any of those foods. With questions and with working through that specific Okay, so that's the bulk of the information for today. This is the final quote that I like to use. Again, when thinking about food and nutrition, when the joy goes out of eating, nutrition does suffer. And so we need to bring that joy back in. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to myself or any other dietitian as well. Thank you all so much for joining. And now we will move on to some of those discussion questions and anything in the chat box with Sierra managing that.
So feel free to type out your questions in the chat box, DM them privately, unmute yourself and ask them. This is kind of just a casual chat, so I'm just here to direct them to Kallen. So I've kind of gathered some questions here so far. They all are pretty independent of one another. So I'm just gonna kind of shoot them and go from there. So the first one would be, what are some different circumstances that would alter protein needs?
Different circumstances that would alter protein needs. Kind of going back to that, depending on someone's activity level, how much they work out, what kind of activity they engage in. With a new diagnosis or condition, that can definitely make it either easier for or a person needing less protein or a person needing more protein. And so those are also really important. If you have any kind of condition, make sure that you talk with your doctor or get a referral for a dietitian to see if there's any extra needs or modifications to your diet that might be helpful with managing that condition.
Okay, so the next question is, what are the consequences of consuming too much protein, and can too much protein be harmful?
You cut out there for a second, Sierra. Could you repeat that, please?
Sorry, yeah, that's kind of happening on my end too. So the question, it's like a two-parter. So what are the consequences of consuming too much protein, and could too much protein be harmful?
Sorry, Sierra, can you repeat that one
Yes,
more time? I missed that
yes.
again.
Um,
Internet.
I know, right?
Technology.
What are the consequences of consuming too much protein, and can too much protein be harmful?
Oh, great question. So the consequences to maybe consuming too much protein immediately, there aren't any. That's how come when I gave that example for the 24-ounce steak, your body can't really absorb all of the protein and that's totally okay. With that, it's also helpful to know that sometimes if we have way too much protein all the time for a bit, sometimes it can be a little bit hard on our kidneys, but that shouldn't cause any extra pain or negative consequences later on in life.
Okay, so next question. This is kind of something that I was wondering about, just because I've kind of been learning about like personal biases and how that can influence supplementation and perception of nutrients. So I was just wondering like what you would have for advice for someone who might let their own biases about supplementation overshadow the science. So maybe someone who thinks like this supplement is good for me, I should take it, stuff like that, but the science proves otherwise. What would you say to those people?
Type it in the chat box.
Sorry, did you ask me to type in the chat box? It cut out again.
There we go. Now your camera is back.
Did you say type in the chat box?
The chat box, please. I think the internet's being a little wonky again. Okay, the question is, what is your advice for someone who may let their own biases about supplementation overshadow the science? Conceived ideas about protein, it is definitely valid. There's a lot of information out there, especially since high protein diets or ways of eating have become really popular. Just know that as a dietitian, I do speak from the science. Really know that it's up to the individual. Whenever I work with someone, it's all about them. I bring the science, but they are the lived experience. And definitely there are times in our lives where we hear something and it might not be true, but it might be something that we just go with because that's what we hear and that's what we know in the moment. And so I would encourage anyone who has your own thoughts about protein or high protein ways of eating, reach out to a professional, reach out to a registered dietitian, and just have a conversation with them. I'm always open for that. And kind of opening your dietitians, myself, we are here to help you and to support you and to make the science and the evidence transferable so it's easy for the average person, the average student, to take that information and use. And so we're really open just to have any of these conversations and to have a good communication and dialogue with every single person, regardless of your thoughts or ideas, just so that we can share what's accurate, as well as to dispel any of those questions or myths or explain it just in a little bit better way for you to understand.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. That was a struggle. But the last question so far that we have gotten in are what are signs of protein deficiency and when should we be worried about that?
Protein deficiency is sometimes common. It's actually called kwashiorkor. It's a type of wasting. It's very, very rare in development. That my laptop battery is running low. So I'm actually going to end the discussion at that before my laptop dies. And I want to thank you all so much for joining the ASU Dining website under the nutrition tab with the nutritional download. So thank you so much. much, and we hope to hear from you soon. And I hope that this information was very helpful for all of you when learning more about protein. Have a great night. Bye-bye.